you never forget the smell. Smoke, wet ash, something chemical, and something worse, something personal. Like your life was set on fire on purpose. I stood there, silent, just standing in front of what used to be my home. Maybe the word home stopped meaning anything the moment they turned it into blackened rubble. It didn't make sense at first. I had just driven back from my sister's place, expecting to find my porch lights on, my dog barking through the window, my kitchen smelling like rosemary. Instead, I found silence. Cold, thick silence. And smoke that curled through the air like a curse whispered too late. People say you can see your life flash before your eyes in moments like that, but mine didn't flash. It just froze. Time didn't move. My legs didn't either. They actually did it. They burned my house to the ground because I refused to join their HOA. Crazy, right? But this story isn't about some homeowners association drama. This is about what happens when petty power goes unchecked. People think they're above consequences. It's about how a group of neighbors turned into criminals, and how they learned too late who they were messing with. I didn't tell them I was a federal judge. It's the funny part. I let them assume I was just a quiet, middle-aged woman living alone with a garden and a pair of hiking boots, always muddy. Someone harmless, someone soft. I let them think that. I still remember the first time I met her. Karen Langley, self-appointed president of the Willow Creek HOA. She came knocking the day after I moved in. Tight blonde bob clipboard and a smile so forced it should have come with a warning label. "Hi there. Just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood," she chirped, waving a folder in my face. "Here's your HOA packet, rules, and monthly dues form." I blinked at her. Sorry, I didn't know this area had an HOA. She tilted her head like I had just confessed to committing a crime. "Well, all of Willow Creek participates. It's how we keep things looking beautiful around here." I checked the deed before I bought. I said gently, "There's no HOA requirement on my property." Her smile twitched. Just a hair. "Oh, well, it's not on paper for a few homes, but we expect everyone to contribute. It's community. Spirit, you know?" I handed the packet back. "I believe in community, but I don't believe in forced compliance." Her eyes turned cold so fast I felt the temperature drop. That's where it started. At first it was little things. Notices taped to my door about lawn length, despite mine being the shortest on the block. Trash pickup mysteriously skipped every other week. Garden beds torn through by a landscaping crew sent by mistake. Then came the emails, then the threats. "If you won't join, maybe this isn't the right neighborhood for you." I said nothing. I kept copies, every note, every warning. I documented everything. They didn't know who I was. Grace Thomas, sitting quietly in her kitchen with a laptop open to legal statutes. Most people don't even know exist. I didn't flex my job, didn't name drop my clearance. I just listened, watched, and waited. I remember one afternoon, maybe 6 months after I moved in, walking to my mailbox to find it smashed. Again, it had happened twice already. This time it was twisted sideways, the wood splintered like a broken limb. I stared at it, sighed, and took a picture. That photo joined the growing folder labeled Willow Creek Evidence. It was growing faster than my roses. I still tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they were just territorial. Maybe they'd calm down eventually. But then I went to an HOA meeting. Not because I wanted to, but because something told me. I needed to see what was happening behind those polished smiles. Karen nearly choked on her lemon. "Water when I walked in?" "I thought you weren't a member," she said, trying to sound polite. "I'm not," I answered. "But I live here. And your meetings are open to residents, right?" She nodded stiffly. I took a seat. What I heard that night was worse than anything I expected. They weren't just talking about lawn, standards, or paint colors. There were whispers, low, deliberate, coded. Clean sweep, one board member called it. A plan for neighborhood preservation targeting non-compliant homes. The language was careful, but I'd read between lines my whole life. It wasn't about preserving. It was about punishing. They were organizing. And I was first on their list. But even then, observed. I wasn't ready to make noise, not until I had enough to make it thunder. The fire changed that. I wasn't even supposed to be home that night. I had canceled a work trip to DC last minute because I'd caught a flu. Lucky me. When I pulled up that night, I noticed something strange. A car I didn't recognize, parked half a block away. Engine running. Lights off. I stepped out quietly. Moved through the trees beside my yard, crouched low. Oh. And that's when I saw them 3 people. Woods up. One of them held a canister. Another lit something in their hand. My stomach dropped. I reached into my bag and hit record on my phone. Then I called 911, whispered the details, and waited. They moved toward my porch. That's when I stepped out. Drop it. They froze. Of them, bolted immediately. The other fumbled, dropped the canister. The third turned to slowly Rick. He looked straight at me like he'd seen a ghost. He never expected me to be there. Never expected the taser I had in my coat pocket either. He went down hard. The others got away, but I had what I needed: footage. A suspect, and a direct link to the HOA. By the time police arrived, my hands were still shaking, but not with fear. It's fury. They'd crossed a line, and now it's going to show them who they were really dealing with. Weeks later, I stood in, court robes on, staring down the man who helped torch my life. Rick didn't recognize me at first, but when he did, his eyes went wide. His lips parted like he was trying to swallow a scream. He thought he was setting fire to a nobody. A woman who wouldn't pay her dues. He didn't know he was lighting a match under the feet of a federal judge, and that was his biggest mistake. If you're still with Melissan, I know this is intense. But this isn't even the worst of it. The people behind this weren't just clueless or cruel. They were organized, deliberate, dangerous. But they also underestimated the one thing they never expected to face in their polished little neighborhood: consequences. Stick around, because what happens next changes everything. I thought that after the fire, things would calm down. That maybe, just maybe, they'd realize they'd gone too far. But that's not what happened. It got worse. Rick's arrest was just the first crack in their mask. The board panicked, but instead of stopping, they scrambled to cover it all up. They erased emails, held secret meetings, and tried to paint me as some unstable recluse looking for attention. Imagine watching your neighbors, people who smiled at you in the grocery store, turn into cowards the moment you refused to be controlled. Karen, though, she didn't hide. She doubled down. She marched right up to the police station with a lawyer in tow, demanding Rick's release and claiming I was targeting them with personal vendettas. She even went so far as to suggest I set the fire myself for sympathy. I saw the press release. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was pathetic. You don't spend 20 years on the federal bench without learning how people react under pressure. Karen was cracking, fast, and yet it still hurt. Not the lies, not the deflection. What broke me was the silence from the rest of the neighborhood. Not one person came by to check on me after the fire. Not a single call, not a card. These people saw the smoke, saw the firefighters, saw me crying into the front of my coat as they dragged a melted kitchen sink from the wreckage, and they just kept walking. That was the night I stood in my hotel room, staring out the window at a city I no longer recognized, and made a decision. I wasn't going to just rebuild. I was going to bury them with the truth. I started by going back through every document I'd collected since the day I moved in. Dues notices, HOA flyers, emails, recordings, videos of Karen threatening to make my life difficult if I didn't play ball. I built a file that would make a RICO prosecutor weep with joy. But there was one thing missing: proof that the rest of the board knew what Rick had done, that they approved it, that it wasn't just one rogue idiot with a matchbook. And then, out of nowhere, I got a message. Anonymous, no name, it's just a burner number. I have proof, meet me. I don't scare easily, but that message made me sit straight up. The location was an empty parking lot behind a closed diner, just outside the neighborhood. I went. Wore a wire, brought backup. My assistant Maria, an ex-US Marshal who owed me a favor, waited nearby with a camera and a Beretta under her coat, and then a car pulled up. It was Cheryl, the HOA secretary, trembling hands, sweating, pale. "I can't do this anymore," she said, barely getting the words out. I didn't know they were going to actually do it. I didn't say a word, just waited. She opened her purse and pulled out a USB drive. Meeting recordings. Board discussions. Karen's voice clear as day. "We have to force her out. If she won't leave on her own, we'll give her a reason to." She even laughed. That laugh would later be played in a courtroom, in front of a stunned jury. But that night, I just closed my hand around the drive and looked Cheryl in the eye. "You did the right thing," I told her. She started crying. Back in the hotel, I spent all night watching every file. I watched them joke about my mailbox. Plan out how to make things uncomfortable. One of them, Mike, the treasurer, even said, "If a little scare gets her packing, what's the harm? A little scare." They burned down my life, but now I had enough, and I was going to use it. The lawsuit I filed was just the beginning. Criminal charges followed within weeks. I worked with the U.S. Attorney's Office to file for federal arson, racketeering conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The headlines exploded. HOA board under federal investigation after fire. You'd think that would shut them up, but Karen held a press conference. She stood there, perfectly dressed, eyes glittering, pretending to be the victim. "This is an overreach. Our HOA has always operated with the best interest of the community in mind." I remember watching that on TV with my arms folded, just stunned. No remorse, no apology, just pride. Narcissism in its purest form. I didn't want revenge. That's the thing no one understood. I wanted accountability. I wanted truth. I wanted justice. The next few months were the worst of my life. Court hearings, depositions. Karen tried every trick in the book. Claimed harassment, bias, even tried to have the case thrown out on a technicality. But every time, we shut her down. And every time she saw me in court, her confidence shrank a little more, until one day it was just gone. I'll never forget that. Morning, she walked into the courtroom wearing all white, like she thought she could purity wash her sins. Her lawyer whispered furiously in her ear. But when she looked up and saw me sitting behind the bench, her face changed. That was the moment she finally realized who I was. Not Grace with the muddy hiking boots, not the woman with the pretty roses who wouldn't pay her HOA dues, but Judge Grace Thomas. And her world shifted. The trial started 2 weeks later. The evidence was overwhelming, Cheryl testified. Rick pled out in exchange for a reduced sentence. The USB files were played on the big screen. Every disgusting second of their planning exposed. I watched the jury as they listened, faces frozen, jaws clenched. When they played the part where Karen laughed about maybe a little scare, someone in the audience gasped. That was the moment. I knew this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was bigger than me. Karen was found guilty on multiple counts: arson by conspiracy, destruction of property, endangerment, and obstruction. Sentenced to 18 years. Others on the board got less, but enough. Enough to break the illusion of control they built. And then came the part they never expected. Civil penalties. I sued the HOA for every penny they had. I won. Their accounts were drained. Their headquarters sold off. HOA was disbanded permanently by court order. In the neighborhood, they tried to apologize. Too late, some mailed letters. Others knocked quietly on the hotel door where I stayed. One woman left a basket of muffins. On my rental car windshield, I never responded. Not out of bitterness, because silence was all they had earned. I did eventually rebuild on my own terms. No HOA, no clipboard queens. Just land, trees, and peace. But I left Willow Creek, not because they drove me out, but because I didn't want to live where justice had to be served with fire. Sometimes people ask me, would you do anything differently? And I think, maybe, I'd have spoken up sooner. Maybe I wouldn't have stayed quiet for so long, hoping things would blow over. But more than anything, I wish they'd known who I was before they chose to light that match. Not because my title would have scared them, but because maybe, just maybe, they would have realized I wasn't the kind of woman you'd burn. You're still here. That means something. You've seen what they tried to take from me. and you felt the weight of it. But there's still more. There's what happened after the trial, what the city tried to cover up. The secret Karen kept buried, and the final confrontation that no one saw coming. Not even me. So keep watching, because this story isn't done yet, not by a long shot. You'd think after sending an entire HOA board to prison, I could finally breathe. But peace doesn't come easy when the fire you survived keeps echoing through every hallway you walk down. Even in the silence, I could still hear it. The pop of the wood splitting, the roar of something being destroyed just because it dared to stand alone. I tried to move on, bought a small home in a different county. Simple, secluded. No neighbors within shouting distance. But I couldn't sleep. Not really. I'd wake up at 3 a.m. and stand by the window, waiting for lights that never came. Listening for footsteps that didn't exist. The truth is, I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I was afraid of what else I didn't see coming. Because one thing kept bothering me. Why? Why go so far? Why burn down a judge's house over an HOA membership? Even narcissists have a limit, but they didn't unless they were covering something bigger. I didn't want to fall down that hole. I really didn't, but it kept tugging at me. And then it started again. First it was a voicemail blocked number. No words, just breathing. Then a file appeared in my mailbox. No return address inside. Property records, maps, markings I didn't recognize. Willow Creek's boundaries, but not the ones listed in the public record. These were older, hand-dash drawn, and then a highlighted note next to one parcel, my old property, not zoned residential. I stared at that one sentence for hours. You see, Willow Creek was supposed to be a residential and lonely community. That's how Karen and her crew justified all their control, protecting neighborhood character. But that little note changed everything. Because if my land was never zoned for residential use, then the HOA had no authority over it, none. But that wasn't the bombshell. There was something else. A permit number from over a decade ago. I traced it. Took a week of digging through county files, chasing paper trails so old they were stored in dusty back rooms behind locked cabinets, and there it was. A redevelopment plan signed off by the mayor's office. Buried. Hidden, forgotten, until they were going to build on that land. Not homes. Not a park, a commercial development, private marina, boutique resort, golf course. It was Karen's project, backed by the city, backed by money, and my house was in the way. Suddenly the fire made sense. I wasn't just the neighborhood inconvenience. I was standing on property worth millions. The HOA didn't act alone. They were just the front line. The real enemy was higher. I requested a formal investigation, sent my findings to the state attorney general's office, used every ounce of legal leverage I had. And then, 2 weeks later, I got another message. No sender, just for words. Drop this or burn. My fingers went cold reading it, not because I was afraid, but because I knew they thought. Threats would work. That's when I called an old friend from Washington, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. We'd served together during a federal corruption case that rocked half a state. He now worked for internal oversight. I need eyes on Willow Creek, I said. He didn't ask questions, just said say less. It moved quickly after that. A secret land transfer involving a shell company traced back to a PAC supporting the mayor. A forged signature on my property line from a decade ago. And one more thing, security footage from a nearby gas station. The night before my house burned, a black SUV parked at the edge of Willow Creek. A man stepped out, met with someone in a red jacket. The man, the mayor's deputy, and the red jacket? Karen, it wasn't just revenge, it was business. They needed me gone so they could finalize the transfer, build the resort, turn my soil into their playground. And when I said no, they tried to erase me. I could have gone public right then. But I wanted them to see it. I wanted them to sit there, in a courtroom like I had, and realize just how badly they miscalculated. So I waited, built the case. It took 6 months. Subpoenas, warrants, depositions, pressure from every angle. And then one cold November morning, I walked back into that same courthouse, not as a judge, but as a plaintiff, civil suit against the mayor, his deputy, the city, and the now-defunct HOA. Millions in damages. The courtroom was packed. News cameras everywhere. Karen showed up. No white dress this time, just a gray suit, too loose on her now thinner frame. Lisa looked at me, eyes dull. I didn't flinch. I had cried for my home. Now, I was here for justice. The trial took weeks. They denied everything. Of course, called me paranoid, called me dramatic, even tried to claim I doctored evidence. But truth is louder than spin. When the footage played of Karen meeting the deputy the night before the fire, the room went still. When the records came out of the city's land swap plans, people gasped. And when the anonymous file was revealed verified by whistleblower protection, the case was done. The jury ruled in my favor. The city paid me everything I asked for, and then the mayor, forced to resign. The deputy, facing federal charges, Karen, was convicted again in Willow Creek. Declared a zone of criminal interest. They tried to bury me in silence, but they didn't know. They were dealing with someone who's heard every excuse, every manipulation, every lie you could throw, because I've judged worse men than them, and I didn't just survive, I exposed them to everyone. The night after the verdict, I sat on the steps of my new home, quiet, peaceful, no threats, no reporters, just stars. For the first time in years, I breathed, but one thing kept circling in my mind. There are people like Karen everywhere, people who weaponize power, who take advantage of silence, and what scares them more than anything is someone who won't back down. If you're still watching, I want to tell you something. No matter who tries to silence you, no matter how many clipboards they hold, or how loud they scream rules, truth doesn't burn, and the fire that tried to destroy me lit the path to take them all down. Stay with me, because the final part of this story isn't about revenge. It's about legacy, and you won't believe how it ends. Some people rebuild a house after a fire. I rebuilt a legacy, but not right away. After the verdict. After the headlines, after Karen and the rest of them were just mugshots and broken reputations, I felt empty, not victorious, not vindicated, just tired. I stayed away from the city, from the courtroom, from the law. For months, I didn't wear the robe. I didn't read a single case file. I slept late. I let my hair grow out. I walked barefoot through the grass behind my new home, and I asked myself a question I'd been avoiding for years. Who am I if I'm not fighting? It was a strange kind of peace, one I didn't trust at first, but it gave me space. Space to listen. To really listen. Because I started getting letters from people I'd never met. Dozens at first. Then hundreds. One came from a retired Marine in Texas. His HOA threatened foreclosure because he built a wheelchair ramp without permission. Another from a single mom in Michigan. Fined $900 for planting vegetables in her front yard. They had no voice, no power. No judge on their side. They watched my story and saw something they never expected from someone like me. They saw hope, and suddenly everything made sense. That fire, it wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. So, went back. Not to the bench, but to the front lines. I launched an organization called Fireproof. It's free legal aid for families bullied, harassed, or illegally fined by HOAs across the country. We set up hotlines, built a legal team, started hosting online clinics. Within a year, we had helped over 3,000 people take back control of their homes. We won cases. We overturned unjust fines, stopped illegal foreclosures, and yes, we dismantled more than a few corrupt HOA boards. I stopped being just Judge Grace. People started calling me the woman who burned back. I smiled every time I heard it because I didn't just get justice for myself. I turned my scars into shields for others. But the final chapter of this story isn't mine alone. It belongs to a girl named Lily. 16 years old, bright, shy, lived with her grandmother in a small community just like mine used to be. One day her grandma didn't trim the hedges on time, $50 fine, then a second. Then a third. When she couldn't pay, the HOA placed a lien on the house. Filed for foreclosure, all over some bushes. Lily called our hotline sobbing. They're trying to take the only place I've ever felt safe. Fought hard. Bono help. Filed injunctions. Took it to court, and we won. Her voice cracked when she called me. I don't know how to say thank you. You already did, I said. I thought of my own home, the one I lost, the one I built again. I thought of the woman I used to be, standing on the ashes. Too proud to cry in front of the firefighters. And then I thought of the moment Karen stood. In court, her voice shaking for the first time ever. We are fireproof when we protect each other. And that's what I wanted Lily to understand. That's what. I want you to understand they didn't burn down my life. They built a movement, without meaning to. Every time they tried to silence me, they gave me a louder reason to speak. Every time they used fear, they made my courage stronger. Every fine, every threat, every cruel word whispered across a white picket fence, they all became bricks in the foundation of something unshakable. You may not wear a robe or hold a gavel, but your voice is powerful. It's enough if they tell you to sit down, stand taller. If they tell you to back off, lean in. If they try to take what's yours, fight smart, fight legal. Fight like your home is sacred, because it is. And because no clipboard, no board meeting, no printed newsletter should ever hold more power than your dignity. You've watched this far. You've stayed through every twist, every scar, every courtroom. Blow. So here's what I ask. Don't let this just be another story. Let it be your reason to speak out, to protect someone, to help someone, to believe that justice still lives in ordinary people who refuse to be pushed around. And if someone tries to tell you that one voice can't change anything, just tell them about Grace, the woman they tried to burn and what rose from the fire. If this story meant something to you, if it made you feel something, don't let it end here. Hit that subscribe button. We'll share this with someone who needs to hear it, someone who feels small, someone who feels bullied, someone who needs to know they're not alone, because together we are fireproof. And this is just the beginning.